The Earth nation you call the United States, for example, has long thought itself to be a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It is not a coincidence that this nation rose to become the most prosperous on earth. It is also not surprising that this nation is gradually losing all that it has worked so hard to create. But this nation seems to have lost its vision. The terms under God, indivisible meant just that. They expressed the universal truth of unity, oneness, a matrix very difficult to destroy. But the matrix has been weakened. Religious freedom has become religious righteousness, bordering on religious intolerance. Individual freedom has all but vanished as individual responsibility has disappeared. The notion of individual responsibility has been distorted to mean every man for himself. This is the new philosophy that imagines itself to be hearkening back to the early American tradition of rugged individualism. But the original sense of individual responsibility upon which the American vision and the American dream was based found its deepest meaning and its highest expression in the concept of brotherly love. What made America great was not that every man struggled for his own survival, but that every man accepted individual responsibility for the survival of all. America was a nation that would not turn its back on the hungry, would never say no to the needy, would open its arms to the weary and the homeless, and would share its abundance with the world. Yet as America became great, Americans became greedy. Not all, but many. And as time went on, more and more. As Americans saw how good it was possible to have it, they sought to have it even better. And there was only one way to have more and more and more. Someone else had to have less and less and less. As greed replaced greatness in the American character, there was less room for compassion for the least among the people. The less fortunate were told it was their own damned fault. They didn't have more. After all, America was the land of opportunity, was it not? No one except the less fortunate found it possible to admit that America's opportunity was limited, institutionally, to those already on the inside track. In general, these have not included many minorities, such as those of certain skin color or gender. Americans became arrogant internationally as well. As millions starved across the globe, Americans threw away enough food each day to feed entire nations. America was generous with some, yes, but increasingly her foreign policy came to be an extension of her own vested interests. America helped others when it served America to do so. That is, when it served America's power structure, America's richest elite, with a military machine that protected those elite and their collective assets. America's founding ideal, brotherly love, had been eroded. Now any talk of being your brother's keeper is met with a new brand of Americanism. A sharp mind toward what it takes to hold on to one's own, and a sharp word to any among the less fortunate who would dare ask for their fair share, for their grievances to be redressed. Each person must take responsibility for herself or himself. That is undeniably true. But America and your world can truly work only when every person is willing to stand responsible for all of you as a whole.
So collective consciousness produces collective results.
Exactly. And this has been demonstrated time and time again throughout all of your recorded history. In the United States, you have tried to provide for the common interest, the best interest, through laws. You failed miserably. Your nation is the richest, most powerful on the earth, and it has one of the highest infant mortality rates. Why? Because poor people cannot afford quality prenatal and postnatal care, and your society is profit-driven. I cite this as just one example of your miserable failure. The fact that your babies are dying at a higher rate than most other industrialized nations in the world should bother you. It does not. That says volumes about where your priorities are as a society. Other countries provide for the sick and needy, the elderly and infirm. You provide for the rich and wealthy, the influential and the well-placed. 85% of retired Americans live in poverty. Many of these older Americans and most people on low income use the local hospital emergency room as their family doctor, seeking medical treatment under only the most dire of circumstances and receiving virtually no preventive health maintenance care at all. There's no profit, you see, in people who have little to spend. They've worn out their usefulness. And this is your great society.
Well, you make things sound pretty bad. Yet America has done more for the underprivileged and the unfortunate, both here and abroad, than any other nation on earth.
America has done much. That is observably true. Yet do you know that as a percentage of its gross national product, the United States provides proportionately less for foreign aid than many much smaller countries? The point is that before you allow yourself to become too self-congratulatory, perhaps you should look at the world around you. For if this is the best your world can do for the less fortunate, you all have much to learn. You live in a wasteful, decadent society. You've built into virtually everything you make what your engineers call planned obsolescence. Cars cost 3 times as much and last a third as long. Clothes fall apart after the 10th wearing. You put chemicals in your food so they can stay on your shelf longer, even if it means your stay on the planet is shorter. You support, encourage, and enable sports teams to pay obscene salaries for ridiculous efforts, while teachers, ministers, and researchers fighting to find a cure for the diseases which kill you go begging for money. You throw away more food each day in your nation's supermarkets, restaurants, and homes than it would take to feed half the world. Yet this is not an indictment, merely an observation. And not of the United States alone, for the attitudes that sicken the heart are epidemic around the world. The underprivileged everywhere must grovel and scrimp to merely stay alive, while the few in power protect and increase great hoards of cash, lie on sheets of silk, and each morning twist bathroom fixtures made of gold. And as emaciated children of ribs and skin die in the arms of weeping mothers, their country's leaders engage in political corruptions which keep donated foodstuffs from reaching the starving masses. No one seems to have the power to alter these conditions, yet the truth is, power is not the problem. No one seems to have the will. And thus it will always be, so long as no one sees another's plight as his own.
Well, why don't we? How can we see these atrocities daily and allow them to continue?
Because you don't care. It's a lack of caring. The entire planet faces a crisis of consciousness. You must decide whether you simply care for each other. Let's look at the numbers. As of March 1994, the world's governments spend about $1 trillion a year for military purposes. That's $1 million a minute worldwide. The nations that are spending the most could redirect the most to the other priorities mentioned. So larger, richer nations would see it in their best interest to do so, if they thought it was possible. But larger, richer nations cannot imagine going defenseless, for they fear aggression and attack from the nations which envy them and want what they have. There are 2 ways to eliminate this threat. Share enough of the world's total wealth and resources with all of the world's people so that no one will want and need what someone else has, and everyone may live in dignity and remove themselves from fear. Create a system for the resolution of differences that eliminates the need for war, and even the possibility of it.
The people of the world would probably never do this.
They already have.
They have.
Yes. There is a great experiment now going on in your world in just this sort of political order. That experiment is called the United States of America.
Which you said was failing miserably.
It is. It has very far to go before it could be called a success. Still, it is the best experiment going. As Winston